She cleaned the homes of the rich, until one of them soaked her in mud on purpose. But what that woman didn't know, someone was watching. You ever have one of those days where the world just feels like it's testing you? Not loudly, not with sirens or shouting, but in the small, petty ways that stick to you more than they should. Keisha Monroe was having one of those days. It was 5:17 p.m., and the rain had finally stopped in Burlingame, California. Not enough rain to flood anything, just enough to leave the curbs lined with puddles the color of cold coffee. The kind of puddles you can't avoid no matter how careful you are. And Keisha? She was always careful. She stood near the edge of Hill Point Drive, the kind of street where houses came with names and gates answered by intercoms. She'd just finished her last cleaning job of the day. Her back ached, her sneakers were damp, and her shoulder was sore from carrying a bag full of cleaning supplies all afternoon. Her uniform, a navy polo and khaki pants, wasn't exactly designed for comfort, but it was clean. She was clean. That mattered to her. She was checking the bus times on her phone when she heard the engine. A low, purring growl from behind her. Keisha glanced up. A pristine white BMW X5 slowed as it approached the curve. She knew the car. She knew who drove it. Behind the wheel sat Sloan Pembroke, the type of woman who walked like she was late to something important, even when she wasn't going anywhere at all. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tight it looked like it hurt, and her sunglasses, yes, even in the shade, sat perched on her face like armor. She was the kind of rich that made you invisible if you didn't look like her. Keisha had worked in her house once, just once. The job ended without a goodbye, without a thank you, and definitely without an explanation. Their eyes met through the windshield. Keisha took half a step back from the curb. She shouldn't have had to. There was plenty of room on the road, but something in Sloan's stare told her to move. Then the car jerked a little to the right. The front tire plowed straight through the biggest puddle on the street. The splash hit Keisha hard, muddy water soaking her pants, her bag, even the front of her shirt. She flinched, sucking in a breath. The cold shocked her body before the shame even had time to set in. The BMW didn't slow down. It didn't hesitate. It glided past like nothing had happened. But Keisha had seen it. The smirk. Right before Sloan pulled forward, her lips curled just slightly. A tight, bitter smile. Not an accident. A choice. Keisha stood there, dripping. Her hands clenched the straps of her bag, jaw locked, heart pounding. She didn't move right away, didn't yell, didn't cry. She just stood. The kind of stillness that only comes when you're deciding whether to break. But across the street, someone else was watching. Not every expensive car gets your attention in a place like Burlingame, but a white BMW swerving to soak a young woman, that'll do it. From the corner across the street, Jonas had seen everything. He wasn't supposed to be there, not exactly. Jonas had stepped outside to take a call in private. Inside the office, the noise from the team meeting was a bit too much, and he hated being interrupted. The phone call had ended a minute before the splash. He was mid-text when he saw the moment, when he watched that white SUV deliberately jerk toward the curb like a shark circling a seal. Then came the water. It hit her full force, not a light spray. This was soaked to the bone, public humiliation type damage. Jonas winced. At first, he expected the driver to stop, to lean out and apologize. Nothing. That wasn't just a car. That was Sloan Pembroke. And that girl, the one now standing still and soaked, with mud dripping down her legs like she'd been hit with a fire hose, he knew her too. Her name was Keisha Monroe. She was one of the local hires brought on through a neighborhood job initiative his foundation had helped fund the year before. Jonas had met her at the community center back when the program kicked off. She'd been soft-spoken but focused, asked good questions, took notes. One of those people who didn't talk about their struggle. They wore it quietly, like an old backpack they'd learned not to complain about. He remembered her because she hadn't asked for handouts. She asked for opportunity. Jonas didn't move at first. His eyes followed the BMW as it disappeared behind the hedges lining the Pembroke property. He looked back at Keisha. She hadn't wiped her face, hadn't moved an inch, just stood there soaked in silence. A silence so loud he could feel it pressing against his chest from across the street. Jonas pulled out his phone again, this time not to text. He took a picture, not of her, he'd never do that. He snapped the back of the BMW before it turned the corner. The license plate, the make, the moment. Then he crossed the street. "Excuse me," he said gently, voice lowered like he was approaching a startled bird. "You okay?" Keisha blinked like she hadn't noticed him before. Her mouth opened to say something, but nothing came out. He waited. She finally whispered, "Did you see that?" "Yeah, I did." She looked away quickly, embarrassed. He could see it on her face, the internal war. The voice in her head saying, "Just let it go," versus the fire building in her gut. "I don't even know what I did to her," Keisha mumbled. "I just cleaned her kitchen. Wasn't even there more than a couple hours." Jonas nodded. He could tell she wasn't looking for pity, just trying to understand. "What's your name again?" he asked. She glanced at him, uncertain. Keisha Monroe." "Jonas Reddick," he replied, offering a small smile. "I think we met last year at the Southwood Center. You were asking about licensing fees for your business?" That made her pause. "You remember that?" "Of course I do. You're not the kind of person people forget." Keisha looked down at her soaked pants, then back at the road. Her voice steadied. "She did it on purpose." "I know." She looked at him again, this time with something different behind her eyes. Not shame, not even anger. It was resolve. But what Keisha didn't know was that her story wasn't about to stay small. The worst part wasn't the mud, not the cold water, not the ruined work pants, not even the silent stares from the passing cars that pretended not to see her. It was the feeling of being reminded exactly where she stood in places like this. Keisha sat on the bus bench, still damp, arms crossed tightly over her stomach as if holding herself together. She didn't cry, not because it didn't hurt, but because she'd learned a long time ago that crying in public only made people more comfortable ignoring you. Jonas had offered to drive her home. She'd politely declined. There was something about sitting alone for a few minutes that helped her think, even if the bench was wet. She scrolled through her phone, aimlessly at first. Then her thumb paused over an old draft of a business proposal she'd been working on. Monroe Cleaning and More, a fresh start, room by room. That name meant something to her. It wasn't just cleaning. It was dignity. It was about making people feel at home, even when they were struggling. She'd been raised by her aunt in a 2-bedroom apartment with 6 people. Clean meant order. Order meant peace. When she turned 20, Keisha got her first job scrubbing floors in a downtown motel. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. Over the next 5 years, she hustled through shifts at restaurants, offices, and finally upscale homes. The pay was better in neighborhoods like Burlingame, but the looks, the silence, that stayed the same. Then there was Sloan Pembroke. Keisha had cleaned her house once, a one-time sub for another cleaner who called out sick. She remembered the way Sloan never said hello, never offered water, never made eye contact. That afternoon, Keisha had accidentally knocked over a small silver tray near the fireplace. Nothing broke. She picked it up and wiped everything clean, but she'd seen Sloan watching from the hallway. No words, just that look, like Keisha had left fingerprints on the air. The next day, the cleaning agency told her she was no longer needed for assignments in that area. She hadn't thought about it again. Until now. And now she couldn't stop thinking about it. This wasn't about puddle water. It wasn't about a car swerving. It was about power. Keisha sat up straighter and opened her notes app. She started typing. Not for the business plan this time, for herself. She tried to shrink me today, but she didn't know I've already been small. I've been invisible. I've been the help. I've smiled when I didn't feel like it, but I never let it harden me. Today, she got me wet, but she didn't break me. She saved the note and locked her phone. The next bus wouldn't come for 12 minutes. She wiped her hands on her bag and looked up. That's when she saw Jonas again. He was standing by a black sedan at the corner. He didn't wave, just waited. Still there. Not because he didn't think she could handle herself, but because some part of him probably knew what this moment really meant. It wasn't just about her anymore. Back at his office, Jonas sat at his desk, eyes still on the street through the window. He didn't usually get involved in personal matters, not like this. But this wasn't business. This was character. He pulled up the guest list for the upcoming Burlingame Civic Honors Gala. It was the kind of event where old money met new donations, where faces were polished and apologies always came late. Sloan Pembroke was on the host committee. He scrolled down. Keisha Monroe. Her name had been quietly added 2 weeks ago under Community Impact nominees. He remembered signing the nomination personally, She didn't even know yet. He leaned back in his chair. Sloan had made her move. Now it was time to make his. But Keisha wasn't the only one with history, and this neighborhood had a long memory. 2 days later, Keisha got a letter in the mail that didn't look like the usual stuff. No electric bill, no store coupons, no appointment reminders. It came in a thick white envelope with a gold seal on the flap. Her name was printed in bold, clean letters on the front. Miss Keisha Monroe. She almost didn't open it. Figured it was junk or a mistake, but inside was something she didn't expect. Dear Miss Monroe, we are honored to inform you that you have been selected as a nominee for the 12th Annual Burlingame Civic Honors Gala. Your outstanding commitment to integrity, community service, and professional excellence has not gone unnoticed. Please accept our invitation to attend the ceremony on Thursday, April 27th. Keisha read it twice. Then again, she sat down at her tiny kitchen table, still holding the envelope like it might vanish if she blinked too hard. She thought about calling someone, her aunt, her best friend Tasha, but all she could do for the next 10 minutes was sit and stare at the words. She didn't know Jonas had pushed for her nomination. She didn't even know anyone had noticed what she'd been doing all this time. But someone had. And now she was being invited into a room she'd never imagined herself in, the kind of room Sloan Pembroke had probably never been excluded from a day in her life. Keisha had nothing to wear to a gala, no formal dress, no heels that didn't hurt. But she made a decision right there at her kitchen table, surrounded by the scent of lemon disinfectant and last night's coffee. She was going. Even if she had to walk in wearing her Sunday shoes and a $40 department store dress. Meanwhile, over on Gravely Heights Drive, Sloan Pembroke was swirling a glass of Pinot Grigio while reviewing the event seating chart. She wasn't just on the host committee. She had a hand in the order of the evening. Who spoke, who sat where, who was thanked, who was photographed. Her assistant, a young woman named Bree with nervous energy and a too-fast walk, pointed out something midway through the list. This named Keisha Monroe, she's on the nominee list for the Civic Award. Sloan narrowed her eyes. Keisha? She repeated, like tasting something bitter. Bree nodded. Yeah, she was added recently. I think she's one of the community support workers. Volunteer programs, maybe? Sloan didn't answer. She just turned toward the window, swirling her glass slowly. She remembered her. She remembered that day, the spilled tray, the silence, the decision to have her removed from the schedule. Not because of the accident, but because of what Keisha represented. The help doesn't belong in the spotlight. That was Sloan's world. Unspoken rules and polished smiles. Now, here she was again. The same girl. This time, with a foot inside a door that had never been meant for her. Sloan set down her wine glass and smiled, but not the kind you show in a photo. The kind that means something's already being planned. Move her seat to the back, she said to Bree, somewhere off to the side, and don't put her in the program photo grid. Isn't that against... Sloan cut her off with a look. Bree shrank back slightly. Yes, ma'am. Sloan turned back to her view. The difference between people like her and girls like Keisha, she didn't wait to see how things played out. She made sure they did. But the problem with controlling the spotlight is you never know who's watching from the dark. Thursday night came quicker than Keisha expected. The days leading up to it were a blur of secondhand boutique visits, YouTube makeup tutorials, and borrowed confidence. Tasha, her best friend since junior high, offered to braid her hair and lent her a pair of earrings she hadn't worn since prom. Keisha ended up in a sleek navy dress that hugged without clinging, modest but sharp. The kind of outfit that made you walk a little taller, even if you didn't believe you belonged. She checked her reflection one last time before leaving, whispered to herself, "We're doing this," and stepped into a cab. The Civic Honors Gala was being held at the Callahan Grand Hotel in downtown Burlingame, the kind of place where everything smelled like polished wood and old money. Crystal chandeliers, gold trim, soft jazz humming from a string quartet at the back. Keisha walked in alone. No date, no +1. Just her name on a list and her shoulders pulled back. She gave her name at the check-in table. The volunteer paused, flipped a few pages, then handed her a small card with her table assignment. "You'll be at table 23, she said, without looking up again. Keisha nodded and made her way across the floor. The room was packed with people in tuxedos, gowns, expensive watches, and conversations so fake you could practically hear the polish. Table 23 was in the far right corner, practically next to the server's station. A clear line of separation from the central seating where the nominees and VIPs were supposed to be. She sat down quietly, trying not to let it sting. From across the room, Jonas Reddick had just finished shaking hands with the mayor. He scanned the tables and quickly spotted Keisha, off in the shadows, not where he knew she should have been. He excused himself mid-conversation and made his way toward her. "Keisha," he said, leaning in slightly so the sound didn't carry. "They stuck you back here?" She gave a small shrug, tried to laugh it off. "Maybe they ran out of space up front." "No, that's not what this is." His voice was low, firm. Before she could answer, a loud voice hit the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 12th Annual Burlingame Civic Honors Gala." It was Sloan. Dressed in a black floor-length gown with silver accents, she stood at the podium like she owned not just the night, but the building too. Her smile was flawless. So was her tone. As always, we gather to recognize the exceptional individuals who remind us what makes this community so vibrant, so strong. Keisha watched, lips pressed together. She didn't know what stung more, the way Sloan's voice floated so effortlessly through the room, or the fact that no one else seemed to notice anything was wrong, but someone else did notice. From the media table, a local journalist named Cameron Soto, working on a feature about overlooked community workers, had been tipped off by Jonas earlier that week. She'd come with her camera, her notebook, and a quiet mission: to spotlight a nominee that wasn't supposed to be forgotten. When Keisha's name was skipped during the opening nominee photo roll, Cameron narrowed her eyes. She started taking notes. As the night unfolded, the awards began. One by one, honorees were called to the stage, given plaques and applause. When they reached the Community Empowerment category, the presenter cleared his throat. "And the nominee whose efforts have quietly transformed lives behind closed doors, Miss Keisha Monroe." Keisha blinked. It took a second to realize that was her name. A few heads turned to find where she was seated. Jonas stood and gestured for her to rise. Keisha felt every eye in the room on her as she made her way through the tables, heels tapping gently, heart pounding louder with each step. She walked past table after table, including the one where Sloan sat. Their eyes locked, but this time Keisha didn't flinch. Sloan's smile faltered for the briefest second. Keisha stepped on stage and took the mic with hands that were no longer shaking. She looked out over the room, but what she said next would leave the room completely still. Keisha stood at the podium, her fingers brushing the edges of the paper the organizers had placed there. Some standard thank you script she was supposed to read. But she didn't come all this way to be polite. Not after what happened, not after they tried to keep her small again. She looked up at the sea of faces, wealth, comfort, power, all wrapped in polite expressions and expensive fabric. And right there, 5 rows back, sat Sloan Pembroke, lips pressed tight, wine glass in hand. Keisha cleared her throat. "I wasn't supposed to be here tonight," she began, voice soft but steady. "And I don't mean that in a humble brag way. I mean, I literally wasn't supposed to be here, at this table, at this microphone, or on any nominee list." Some chuckles flickered across the room, mostly nervous. "I clean houses," she continued. "I clean offices, apartments. I've worked for people who didn't know my name, and some who never bothered to say it. And that was fine, because I know who I am." The room quieted even more. "I'm here because someone saw me when I didn't think anyone was looking. Not because I'm special, but because I showed up every day and tried my best. Because I believed that even when you're invisible to the people in the room, it doesn't mean you're unworthy of being in it." She paused, letting that sit. Then her eyes found Sloan. "Some people use power to build walls, to divide rooms, to remind you of where they think you belong." Sloan sat perfectly still, stone-faced, but her grip on the wine glass had tightened. "I've seen it firsthand. People swerving into puddles on purpose, people moving names off programs, shifting tables, shifting stories, all to make someone like me feel like I don't matter. No one dared breathe too loud now." "But here's the thing," Keisha said, her voice growing stronger. "You can move me to the back of the room. You can try to keep me out of the photos. You can splash mud on my clothes. But what you can't do is erase my name from people's hearts, from their lives, from the work I've done." A quiet murmur of agreement started, small claps, then more. I didn't ask to be made into a story, but now that I am, I'm going to own every word of it. She stepped back from the mic, not waiting for approval, not waiting for Sloan's reaction, just done. The room broke into real applause. Nothing polite about it. Clapping that echoed through crystal walls and expensive decor, like truth finally being let loose. Jonas stood up, clapping slow and steady. Cameron Soto was already texting her editor. And Sloan Pembroke? She didn't clap. She stood up, adjusted her clutch, and slipped quietly out the side door before dessert was even served. Nobody chased her. Nobody missed her. Keisha walked back to her seat, no longer at the edge of the room, but in the middle of something bigger. People stopped her to shake her hand. A local councilwoman offered to connect her with new clients. A teacher asked if she could come speak to his students. She'd shown up soaked in mud once. Now she was shining in her own light. Back at her table, Jonas leaned toward her. "You good?" he asked. Keisha smiled, wide, honest. "I'm not just good. I'm finally seen." But the thing about being seen is, once it happens, you don't ever let them forget it again. The next morning, the Daily Peninsula ran a front-page story titled, "From Mop to Mike, the speech that shook Burlingame." There was a photo, Keisha, standing at the podium, eyes bright, hands open like she wasn't just talking, but telling a truth people had been too polite to say out loud. Cameron Soto's article pulled no punches. She wrote about the mud, the seating change, the deliberate erasure. She didn't name Sloan Pembroke outright, but everyone who mattered knew who she was talking about, especially Sloan. Keisha's phone buzzed all day. Friends she hadn't heard from in years reached out. Local businesses offered free services. A boutique in San Mateo said they'd love to sponsor her next event look, but that wasn't what mattered to her. What mattered was the letter she got in her inbox that afternoon, from a woman she'd never met. "Dear Keisha, I clean houses too. I've worked in this city for 12 years and felt invisible every day. I watched your video 3 times last night. I just wanted you to know. You made me feel proud for the first time in a long time. Thank you." Keisha read it twice, then sat back in her chair. This was why the speech mattered. Not the claps, not the gala, but the fact that somewhere, someone like her now walked a little taller. A week later, Keisha launched the website she'd been planning for over a year, monroecleaningandmore.com. It wasn't fancy, but it was hers. She listed services, contact forms, testimonials from clients who actually respected her. Jonas even wrote a featured review calling her the kind of person who brings order, care, and dignity to everything she touches. She started booking out 2 months ahead. Meanwhile, at the next Burlingame committee meeting, Sloan Pembroke was noticeably absent. No statements, no interviews. She'd gone quiet. The social circles that once leaned in toward her had started to lean away. People remembered what they saw, even if they didn't say it out loud. At the Southwood Community Center, where Keisha had once sat quietly in the back of the room taking notes, she was now being asked to lead workshops for young women starting their first jobs. She brought the same tote bag, same uniform on occasion, just a different story to tell. "You don't have to wear a suit to be respected," she told a group one night. "You just need to respect yourself long enough for others to catch up." Tasha, her best friend, stood in the back that evening, eyes shining. "You were always built for more," she whispered as Keisha stepped down from the podium. Keisha smiled. "I just had to stop waiting for permission." There were still hard days, still long hours, still clients who didn't make eye contact. But the difference now was, she knew exactly who she was, and there was no going back to shrinking for anyone. She used to wait at the curb, hoping not to be splashed. Now, she walks in the middle of the street. But the truth is, mud only sticks if you let it. Some people think power only lives in money, in titles, in luxury cars, and gated driveways. But real power is standing up when someone tries to shrink you. It's walking into a room that wasn't built for you and choosing not to apologize for being there. Keisha Monroe didn't change the world that night. She didn't win $1 million or land on a magazine cover. She didn't need to. She did something harder. She held her ground, told the truth, and let that truth echo loud enough to make the people who pretend not to see finally look. That's the part nobody tells you. Sometimes, the most radical thing you can do is refuse to be erased. And for every Keisha out there, every person who's been stepped over, passed up, talked down to, or made to feel like they don't belong, remember this: You don't have to shout to make noise. You just have to speak when it counts. So if you're watching this and you've ever been splashed by someone who thought they were better than you, don't let it stop you. Build anyway, stand anyway, show up anyway. Because one day, the very people who ignored your name will have no choice but to say it out loud. If this story meant something to you, share it. With a friend, a family member, someone who needs to remember their worth. And never forget, even when the world tries to cover you in mud, you are still worth being seen.